Welcome to The Plain Truth, a show where we go into some of the mysteries, anomalies, and the dirty underbelly of the world around us. I'm your host, Paul, and joining us this week, we have Jim Willie, who's editor of the Hat Trick newsletter, found on goldenjackass.com. Jim, are you there?
I'm here, and it's a pleasure to be on.
Well, thanks much for coming. Appreciate it. Well, there's a lot going on, obviously. Where to begin, right? Hey, I got a question for you. What's going on with China? Is there a war against China? What about that thing in Tianjin or some of these other explosions? Any thoughts on that?
Oh, I've got a lot of thoughts on that. I could probably talk for a few hours on that alone, because it seems to me that the trade war that was pretty clear 2 or 3 years ago has now ramped up into a violent trade and financial war that could not be more dangerous on the world scene. I remember way back when I started the newsletter in 2004, I was saying, well, it looks like they're trying to pass China off as a commercial partner, a trade partner with the most favored nation status, and the $23 billion worth of investment, foreign direct investment in 2001, 2, and 3 by U.S. corporations, I think U.S. and Canada together, which was significant. And everybody was telling me, well, China, they're like the 51st state. And I said, no, I don't think so. They're going to morph into a trade rival, and then it'll move into trade war, and then it'll turn really nasty and ugly, far beyond simple trade war. And that's where we are now. We've got Tianjin, which, as an incident, I hesitate to talk about what I really think is going on with Tianjin, but it's now a little bit too difficult and dangerous not to. It's dangerous, but I can't avoid it. So here's some of my thoughts. The IMF started this sequence, this schoolyard brawl by reneging on the IMF agreement for including the RMB in the SDR, special drawing rights basket of currencies, which is the dollar, the euro, the yen, and the British pound. So that was a violation of an agreement, and it was a major insult to China. It was basically telling them, screw you. I know we made an agreement with you. You were to bring in your yuan, which I'm going to call the renminbi, the RMB into the group of 4 major currencies. But behind the scenes, here's what I think they were thinking. If we bring in the RMB, it's going to cause even more liquidity problems and drainage of the major currencies. The banks in the West are going to be even more vulnerable. And it's going to start perhaps a trend where a lot of Eastern nations decide that they don't want to hold their treasury bonds anymore, and they're going to discharge them and discharge the basket of 4, to bring in more balance into this legitimized RMB, and they're going to welcome in the Chinese government bonds into their reserve system. And we don't want that. So we're going to renege on this. And China responded, what was it, 10 days later? I don't know exactly, but 2 weeks later, a week and a half later, something like that, China responded by devaluing their currency, which is kind of interesting because some clowns out there thought that they were going to revalue upward their currency, given how there's so much more demand for it in international trade. I didn't really have a firm opinion on whether they should increase its value or decrease its value. I just thought that it'd be a good idea for them to break the peg. And I've been expecting for a long time the Hong Kong dollar to go up and break its peg also with the dollar. This peg for the Chinese RMB has really been kind of a trade range ribbon, I call it, since July of 2005. So the Chinese reacted by devaluing their currency, which might have been a bit of an assault against Japan, which has allowed their currency to decline, and no complaints at all from Washington on that, because that's the back end of their announcement to go to infinite QE last year, almost a year ago now, 10 months ago. So the United States government went into Tokyo, Japan, confiscated their $1.2 trillion of government pension funds. The Bank of Japan reacted by going to unlimited QE, which had an instant declining force on their yen currency exchange rate, and the U.S. blessed it all as good because the Japanese were going to be buying more government securities from the U.S., the treasuries. But when China does it, they're now labeled as a villain. Okay, so the second step was the Chinese doing the RMB devaluation, and then in a matter of days, a gigantic explosion in Tianjin. And I defy Americans. I'm very critical of Americans for their ignorance and inability to put together the information. And I want to be very clear. 10% of Americans are aware. 10% of Americans bother to do critical thinking and look at the facts and look at things and see, this doesn't seem right. This is very bothersome. But the other 90% or more, I think, are dumb blocks. They're dumb blocks that speak, that eat, and that poop. And they don't do much else except work and gain that wage. I'm very critical of the American public for being fast asleep and largely blockheads. They haven't looked at what Tianjin is. Tianjin was a giant commercial center. It was the location of a huge car-making plant where 3,000 Volkswagens were incinerated, where some chemical storage depots blew up, where a port facility with 21 ports that probably is larger than Long Beach blew up. And nearby, just 2 or 3 kilometers away, was their supercomputer center with a 1,000 square yard footprint. It didn't blow up. It experienced cracks in the walls, and some of the fiber optic lines were messed up. 1,000 cubic meter, that's how they described it. Okay, well, what is the supercomputer center there? And was that the real target for disabling? They didn't blow it up, but they disabled it temporarily. Well, it connected all the technology companies with their information. I mean, things like schematics for product design, schematics for weapons design. It integrated all the Chinese space projects. It integrated all the Chinese banking information flow. It integrated the patents. It integrated the Chinese military, where they were probably doing their hacking. So was this really an attack on the information logistics center and the Chinese military for their hacking? If you take a close look at the evidence, which again most people don't do, they just read the headline. Oh, look at that! There's a big explosion over there. I guess they have some safety standards over there in China. That's the dumb blockhead response. That's very typical, and they do have safety inadequacies and protection in Chinese industry. There's no doubt about that. But I think that's exploited by the West, because take a close look at the damage and you see a crater in the earth that's, like 20, 30 feet deep, and everything's incinerated. That's not typical for a chemical explosion. Take a look at the damage to the cars and you see exploded radiators from intense heat. That's not typical from a chemical plant, chemical depot explosion. Take a look at the completely wiped out paint on all the cars from the intense heat. That's not typical from a chemical explosion. Take a look at the ash all over the tires and other locations. That is very typical of nuclear explosions.
Yes, exactly. By the way, a lot of people were speculating that it could have been a kinetic weapon. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't really know what a kinetic weapon is. That's not a neutron bomb, I assume.
No, that's the God rods. That's like a heavy weapon from the upper atmosphere or something.
Oh, a laser. A laser burst.
Tungsten or depleted uranium or something like that. Because if it came in at tremendous speed, it would be a bunker buster. It would shatter the ground, and it would have the force of a small nuclear explosion, but it wouldn't be nuclear. It would just be the speed of and the weight of the thing.
Oh, I see.
The reason I mention it, by the way, is if you look at that picture with the hole in the ground, the crater, on the right side of the picture that you normally see, it looks like the ground has been kind of shattered, cracked in a bit relative to, let's say, the left or other parts of it. And if it came in at an angle, that would be something that a bunker buster kind of thing might do. This is all pure speculation here, but it's just another thought.
It's a possibility. I don't dismiss that. In fact, that was a weapon that was displayed on a movie that I saw less than a year ago, whose title I don't remember. It's to take advantage of a very large, a very high-speed moving object that crashes against the Earth. Not speed of light, but tremendous speed, so that's why you call it a kinetic explosion, because its energy is 1/2 mass velocity squared, and if the velocity is very high, I can see that. But I don't really buy the argument. I don't buy that theory, and here's why. Because there are a lot of reports of micro nukes being used in Ukraine, at least 3 or 4, and one micro nuke that is reported to have been used in Yemen. So I think what we have is a new wave of micro-nuclear devices being used, and they're not large enough to attract big attention and say, oh my gosh, it's obvious, there's a mushroom cloud. No, these are not mushroom clouds. They're just intense explosions at the ground level that could pass as a chemical explosion.
Yeah.
So there's precedent elsewhere.
For sure.
In other words, it seems like this is something that our boys believe they can get away with, as the Langley boys like to call it, plausible deniability. Oh, no, that was a chemical explosion. So this is ramping up, and I asked the voice, who's very close to a lot of events in this part of the world, and I asked him, how do you think the Chinese will respond? I don't think they're going to come out with press releases about micronuclear devices being exploded, neutron bombs or what. I don't think that's what they're going to do. I think they're going to come out in their own way and attack the dollar, which is our vulnerable point. What do you think? And he wrote back and said, expect the response to be according to Sun Tzu, where they take our weaknesses and move the implosion along a little faster. And at the same time, I asked him, do you think they're going to launch a little bit more of RMB in trade payments and just have, say, all the BRICS and the alliance nations line up and one by one start announcing that they would prefer, and in order not to interrupt the trade flow and imports to the United States and other Western countries, they would prefer RMB payment in order to push the dollar off the stage? And he said absolutely. So this is how I think China's going to respond. They're just going to move up their timetable for whatever action they have that's going to I think, be a direct assault on the weakest elements of the system. And for the fiat currency system and its debt foundation, that's going to be debt default, removal of the dollar in trade, and just push along the treasury bond fractures. And that's why you've seen in the last 2 months the $200 billion, it's $100 billion a month in dollars worth of treasury bonds that China has discharged. Let me just add a funny little sequitur here. I got a message, and this is a really wonderful part of the hat trick letter and what I call my information switchboard here, the Gmail email inbox. I got a message from a long-term subscriber, and she said, my husband and I were completing a vacation in Manhattan, And then she didn't say what she's doing there. For all I know, it's to see plays or to head on out to the tennis tournament, the U.S. Open, where my brother is, by the way. But she didn't say the purpose of her vacation in Manhattan. But she did say, we noticed something on Friday night at 8 p.m., 5 or 6 limousines in the financial district of South Manhattan, all parked along the front of major Wall Street banks, and she cited Bank of New York Mellon and Bank of America. And she said, we didn't want to leave that alone, so we walked by to see what's going on. And obviously she didn't expect to see much, but she walked by and found one Chinese driver relaxing in the front seat, smoking a cigarette, another Chinese driver standing in front of the car, another Chinese driver who was, I think, taking a snooze, or, at least resting his eyes. We don't always rest our eyes with sleep. Sometimes we just rest it with, quiet time. So she really reasoned, oh my gosh, look at this. 2 major Wall Street banks, Chinese limousines, after the dinner hour Friday night. What is that all about? So something big is going on, Paul, and I don't know what it is, but I think it's maybe China sending over some mucky mucks, some big wigs, some officials or some bank executives, and they're meeting with Wall Street maybe to assure proper redemption of $100 billion per month worth of Treasury bonds. And hey, you guys in Washington and New York, we don't want any problems. Okay, so I'm sure it's
Jim, what's
a lot more than that. I'm sure it's a lot more than that.
What's DC's response, or the City of London and Wall Street? What do they say? If you're, in other words, if you're willing to blow up Tianjin, what are you not willing to do?
Oh, I don't know. I'm not sure what you're asking. Is Langley going to blow up London's financial center?
No, what I'm saying is if China retaliates, okay, then what's the West's retaliation to the Chinese retaliation?
I don't know. Let's see if we have any Chinese retaliation of a non-standard way. So far, they're just demanding redemption of their Treasury bonds. Now, let's see if they do a massive redemption of UK gilts, the British government debt securities. I don't know what they're going to do. I don't know if they're considering London to be sacred, but there was an event, a sequence where Langley was blamed for Chinese stock market interference, that's a nice word, hacking and disruption, and maybe pushing a little bit over the edge with some fragile type sales to cause some momentum. And within days, China apparently hacked the New York Stock Exchange, where New York announced a glitch. So they shut down the NYSE. And next thing you know, the Wall Street Journal website is offline. Next thing you know, American Airlines is offline. And next thing you know, a whole database for all New York-based airline reservations went offline, and all the different airports connecting to New York, which is more than a few and more than, say, 30, they all disrupted and delayed or canceled their flights to New York City. So it's turned a little bit non-standard, this battle. And I think that I don't really care if they do something versus London. I think this is very much between the U.S. and China, and it extends from, I think, some of the big demands for improper usage of gold from the Chinese families. It goes way back. So this is a kind of a climax of the global funds, if you will, which I'm not an expert in. But I think it's somehow connected in a string of conflicts, because the U.S. has been killing heirs and attorneys to the global funds, and China did some hits against Department of Treasury officials who were going after the global fund. I'm not talking about Secretary of Treasury. I'm talking about an assigned special liaison to deal with the global funds. We're talking about 100,000 tons of gold So it's not a small amount. It's 12 times what Fort Knox held. I think this is a climax of the gold battle with China. And it's not going to end well for the United States because except for some nuclear devices, we don't hold any cards at all. We got big debt, we got lacking industry, we got poor infrastructure, and we even have Chinese-owned port facilities. So we're the vulnerable ones here. I think this is a desperation last ditch that we're seeing in events like Tianjin. And they're not alone. Bangkok had its largest explosion and civilian death toll in its history from an explosion just days after Thailand announced its devaluation. So there might be an extra motive in here with China to undermine Japan, but we're going to see how this plays out. I think we're going to have a lot more following up here.
Yeah, Jim, on that thing in Thailand, initial reports were that it might be related to the Uyghurs who were being sent back to China, and they're Turkic people, and in Western China, and there's a whole, terrorism thing there organized by the Langley crowd. And so, in other words, that thing in Thailand also has an element of being an anti-Chinese move, not just a currency thing.
Yes, and the Uyghurs have an office in Washington, D.C. And
who doesn't?
Well,
the
I
Chechens, you know what I mean?
Yeah, but the Uyghurs were pushed out. A group were pushed out days before the explosion in Bangkok. The local government there wanted to boot them out, and I think that the Uyghurs are. I didn't know how to pronounce that. I was thinking it Uyghurs, but okay, Uyghurs. They've got an element of the Uyghur presence in Tianjin, who have been fighting for separatism and independence and just fighting back from maybe being thrown in prison for not wanting to salute the Beijing Communist Party, things like that. So, okay, that for me tells me that the Al-Qaeda base that Langley has been using so effectively for the last 14 years might have now a Chinese outpost called the Uyghurs. That's very useful. It gives them that plausible deniability and say, oh, no, this must be some kind of a separatist violent response within China. It's none of our concern. But when you lump in their connection to Washington and lump in – I heard, for instance, okay, this is a direct comment from a fellow who's an expert in Chinese internal affairs for the last 20 years. I can't think of his name correct. I think it's Cummings. But anyway, I heard from one of my clients who said, Jim, I have direct contact with this Chinese expert. I'm going to ask him for the best scoop that he can provide. And he wrote back in a matter of hours and said, I just got word back. I think the man's name was John Cummings. I can't remember, but whatever it was, he wrote back and said to my client who passed it on to me, word has it that the Langley crew, Brennan, boasted that they supplied the sodium cyanide to the Uyghurs, and that was used in numerous explosions at Tianjin. And that was his connection. And the client said to me, this fellow has impeccable connections inside China. Okay, so to me, that's rather good proof. There's no 100% proof of anything anymore. You have to just collect evidence and say, well, it's mounting, and the credibility of this story is becoming rather compelling. And that's kind of where I am on this Tianjin. We're inviting some extraordinary response from China. They're not going to say, "Oh gosh, we better get in line and stop all this RMB. We better just salute the dollar and walk to the tune of the king dollar." No, we're not going to get that. China doesn't act that way. So,
Jim, but the stuff regarding China has been going on a long time. The leader of the Uyghurs, Rebia Kadir, is in D.C. Lives in D.C. And they've been having lots of terrorist attacks in Western China. I mean, for a long time now. And then you add in things like the color revolution attempt in Hong Kong a few months ago. I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I think the Chinese authorities are very, very angry with DC. So it could get ugly. But I tell you what, why don't we move on a little bit to some other topics so we can get through them today. One other thought that's pretty important these days would be regarding Iran. What do you think may be going on with that? Are there hidden aspects to the nuclear deal? What do you think?
I think the nuclear deal is evidence that the U.S. government's sanctions against Iran are a dismal, colossal failure. Take a look back a few years ago. I think they were put on in 2012, and one of the big developments out of the Iran sanctions was the oil for gold deal that Iran struck with India, and paid with oil shipment from Iran to India, paid by India with gold they bought from Turkey. Okay, that's a nice end-around triangle. This sanctions tool, I think, is going to blow up in the U.S. face. What sanctions have been successful in the last 20 years? None. So do you really think these Russian sanctions are going to be successful either? I don't. I think we're going to see defection by, say, Germany. You can't wreck the European economy just for the sake of the neocon fascists in Washington who have a new world order plan. And there's a saying now that the Americans are willing to continue the Ukraine war to the last European. And I say to the last European GDP unit, because now you see some export declines in Germany. All right, back to Iran. Iran is interesting. There are a couple other angles in here. I believe China is now the dominant force in the entire Persian Gulf, which Saudis prefer to be called the Gulf region. So what I noticed was, starting in 2014, we began to see a whole lot of monthly meetings, and I think the first ones happened in March or April. And I started calling them love fests. They were meetings with the Chinese officials and in the Hall of the People in Beijing, and dignitaries from Saudi, ministers, foreign ministers, commerce ministers, Aramco executives. And it seemed like China was really making a formal statement that their new buddy was the Saudis, and the Saudis were confirming this in a very loud way. I concluded this was the end of the petrodollar being informally announced, because a petrodollar is not just this financial platform with cable lines. It's a vast system that has numerous additional connections, and things like just available funds for investment, cultural exchanges, student exchanges, expanding of embassies, improvement of lending facilities for not just petroleum-based, petrochemical-based projects, but maybe lending facilities, for buying cars for the Saudi public and economy. So I concluded this was the beginning of the end of the petrodollar. I believe China then made a statement to Saudi and to Iran: play nice. Make up your differences. Go through this détente. Reduce your tension. That's what détente means. And at the same time, they let it be known to Oman and Qatar and the other Emirates: play nice. Don't fall victim to the U.S. game of divide and conquer and have conflict, because it's a lose-lose proposition. Instead, play nice with the Iranians. And just don't buy into all the U.S. propaganda about the evil Iranians. All they're doing that the U.S. doesn't like is selling oil and gas outside the dollar. All this nuclear stuff, these nuclear claims, dangerous nuclear, I think it's 90% bullshit. I mean, wasn't Saddam going to blow up the whole world with chemical and nuclear stuff? No, he might have attacked Israel, but Saddam's big violation was he sold oil in euros, and the United States didn't want to see that trend catch fire in the Middle East. So I think China has convinced Iran and Saudis to lay down the sabers, make more peace, resolve things peacefully, resolve things constructively, and maybe listen less to Washington that doesn't have much of anything constructive on their table. Nothing. So when they say that Iran is going to be monitored closely for its nuclear development and projects and refinement of uranium and all this, I think that's window dressing. And I think the real undercurrent influence in the region is Russia. Russia is expanding their connections with Qatar with liquefied natural gas. Russia has been involved in some weapons sales. And let me point out before I move to the next topic here, or continue with your reply, Saudis made a statement last September. They put on display, their military display, a lot of Chinese missiles. They've never done that before. That, I believe, was their statement that they were going to work under the Chinese wing and less so under the American wing. And besides, all this UBS and Credit Suisse, false charges, false motivation of, secret accounts to dodge taxes, Iran sanction workaround, and violations of all the U.S. rules that the U.S. places on the world as the uber lord over all. That was to go after the Saudi gold and steal it in Switzerland. So now that the Saudis have their own response, they never complained about the theft of their gold because they got, it was stolen fair and square with IOUs, certificates put in their place. But now I think the Saudis are going to be working with China and maybe take the $2.2 trillion worth of sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf Emirate nations. Half of that is UAE, the United Arab Emirates. $2.2 trillion. I'm just absolutely certain that's 80 to 90% U.S. treasuries. I think they're going to convert that to gold. And that's the punch in the nuts, really, against the U.S. for stealing the Saudi gold. And a lot of people think that the U.S. has thrown the Saudis under the bus with this entire ISIL movement. They're mostly Saudis. And this is a very big and ugly topic. It's another Langley creation. The U.S. couldn't control the Iraq parliament that was two-thirds Shiites, so we decided to back out, withdraw our military, and send in the mercenaries from Langley, ISIL, have all the fake beheading videos with not a single example of blood squirting out of the neck. So they're all faked. And back to the original question, Iran is now slowly moving into the community of nations within the Gulf. They're not going to become active members of the Gulf Co-op, Gulf GCC, Gulf Cooperative.
GCC. Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the other C stands for. Community? I don't know. Council. Gulf Co-op Council. I don't know that Iran's going to join that, but maybe they will in another year when there's a lot less strain. But in every nation in that Gulf region, it seems that there's a movement by the Shiites, the local Shiites. Like in Bahrain, I think they're two-thirds Shiite, but the royals are Sunni, the moderate Sunnis. So there's a lot of weird conflict going on.
And what about the big $64,000 question? I mean, that's the Syrian war. If that doesn't come, I would assume that the Iran deal has to be secretly about the Syrian war because, in a sense, the Syrian war was designed to break Hezbollah and Iran, right? So if you're going to have peace with Iran, it means peace with Syria, doesn't it?
Exactly, yes. I'm glad you brought that up. mean, I was ready to move on, but that Yemen and Syria really need to be addressed. And I don't claim to be an expert in this, but I look at it from the financial and economic and infrastructure, construction, investment side. Iran gas pipeline was to go through a Syrian port, going to cut through northern part of Iraq and get into Syria and hit the port and supply the European market. The United States doesn't want Iran's gas to reach the European market any more than they want the Russian gas to reach the European market. The U.S. has a secret plan of wrecking the European economy in order for it to be sufficiently prepared for the fascist state with North America. So they don't want the Iran gas line pipeline to join up through Syria. And U.S. with the Saudis, notice a year ago or more, the Saudis pulled the engineering project team from the Iran-Pakistan pipeline. And now that's been revived with Chinese money, and the Saudis are not blocking that anymore with their engineer staff. The Saudis have quite a significant engineering expertise and workforce staff with respect to projects like pipelines, because Aramco is a gigantic center of petrochemicals. Any picture you see of Aramco, all you see are pipes. Okay, so I believe that China is now funding the pipelines, forcing the nations to make nice, and any deal with Iran is going to smooth out the Syrian situation somewhat and isolate one member as a warring party from the West, and that's the Bush crime family. The Bush crime family.
I thought you were going to say Turkey.
Well, Turkey might be involved in ways, but it's an extremely complex player in all this, and I don't pretend to be an expert, but just to show you how complex it is, the organizing operational headquarters in the region for ISIL is the Turkish U.S. Embassy. Okay, so this is very nasty, and Putin has given warning to the Turkish leaders to shape up and, quit cooperating with the U.S. on this side, and the Turk Stream pipeline for Gazprom and Russia to service Europe. That has been on hold now recently. But I think we're going to see a little bit more isolation in Syria with the Bush crime family that's willy-nilly killing civilians and providing the drones for attacks on civilian sites. When are the American people and the population going to show disgust for U.S. military drones killing civilians in foreign countries? Are they ever going to show disgust? Are they ever going to awaken to this? There was an incident a couple of weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago maybe, in Syria where 200 people were killed with American drones, civilians. And the U.S. came back with a comment of, well, accidents will happen. Yeah, okay. All right. Especially when it comes to the subhuman Arabs. Right. That's how the U.S. leadership thinks.
Hey, Jim, since we're on this, we might as well get into the topical issue of massive immigration into southeastern Europe, because this can be another tactic in blowing up Europe, or at least threatening Europe, so that if they don't agree to, like, the trade deal with North America, they'll get more immigrants and more wars. Anyway, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we might as well cover it, because all of these refugees from Syria, North Africa, it's all part of the wars.
Yeah, I don't have any really well thought out and well studied opinion, but I just got a basic notion that's worthy of putting on the table. The U.S. really likes refugees. They like the disruption. They figure disrupt that nation's leadership and we can eventually put in our puppet. But there's more to it. The other side is let the influx take place, because if there are any violent incidents like terrorist bombings or something, we can always blame it on those new immigrants, those Arabs that came in. Must have been some bad element in there. That's all I got to say.
Anyway, it's tragic, and it's going to be nasty for Europe too. But
what is the leading terrorist organization in the world?
well, I would say it's found in Langley, but
exactly what I would say also. Langley CIA. Exactly. No close second.
Yeah, I think they're the first among firsts, so to speak. There's nobody quite at their level.
No one in their league and no close second. But let me also add that the Voice told me a year ago, if you see some things happen in Yemen where the existing regime is toppled, or the American sites, the American-led sites, like, say, the embassy or military weapons depot, ammunition depot, is taken over, which both happened. He said, if Yemen falls in those two respects, look for the House of Saud to fall within 1 year, the Saudi regime fall within 1 year. So the clock has started. I think it started about 3 months ago. That's how important Yemen is. And
well, it's an overlap, and it goes in, and the bases. I mean, it's already happening. The bases inside Saudi Arabia, some of them are already falling.
Right, and Saudi has its own internal problems with things like poverty and insufficient sharing of the petro wealth with the masses. They've got a debt to GDP that's almost as bad as Japan's. They've got a lot of reform movement. They don't like all the Islamic rules. And there's one thing that the Voice stressed, because he has some colleagues who have offices in Dubai, and they get a lot of information about Saudi. The women in Saudi Arabia have had enough.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, well, maybe it's long overdue.
Yeah, they want more rights, and they'd like to stop being slaves.
Well, since everybody's a slave there. Well, why don't we move on, because we could spend forever on the Saudi prison camp. But hey, by the way, what do you think? Are we looking at big events coming? You know, do you think? I don't know if you want to say the world's about to blow up. What are your thoughts? Some people are speculating the next couple of months we're going to see serious stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think a lot hinges on the U.S. Treasury bonds. If the entire system of the king dollar regime across the world holds things together, holds nations in line, keeps the banking structures in check, and the military from the U.S. with its 170 bases, if that keeps nations in line also, I believe the foundation for the entire system of control and power is the U.S. Treasury bond. I mean, you take a look at the fiat currency system, it's all centered around the dollar. So what's the dollar's foundation? It's the Treasury bond. And I've been pointing out for the last 2 or 3 months all the different fractures that have been occurring in the treasuries, whether it's the repo with its occasional negative rate, the repurchase window, whether it's the dollar swap with its occasional negative rate, whether it's the 22 nations now offering a negative bank rate on accounts. You don't have to look far to find problems in the Treasury bond market, especially with its 60% decline in volume in just the last 12 months. So we're seeing cracks there. And now you're seeing China with $105 billion last month in discharged treasuries. And the months before that, another $100 billion. And then Russia just announcing a sudden, like in the last 2 or 3 weeks, discharge of 20% of all Russian-held treasury bonds in their reserves. Now, I don't care their motive. You know, shore up their currency, buy more gold, whatever. They're discharging treasuries, and that's the story. The basis of the U.S. power is the dollar, and the foundation for the dollar is cracking in open view. I think that QE is a gigantic weak link now for the dollar. I just wrote a public article where I brought attention to something Zero Hedge put forth, and that was the $40 billion a day in failures to deliver of Treasury bonds. Multiply that by a month, and you get $1 trillion a month. So it's around $1 trillion a month of failures to deliver in Treasury bonds. And I believe the chief violator of that is Wall Street banks. It looks and smells like naked shorting of treasuries to bring in funds to help their liquidity or to cover, say, petrodollar failed derivatives, or to cover, say, standard oil hedges from the energy sector. Is Wall Street on the verge of a catastrophic event from the decline in the oil price? I think yes. So on the other side of the failures to deliver, you see abuses from the reverse repo window on treasuries. What is this reverse repo all about? Well, it means that the Fed is shoving money into the system without any agent on the other side putting forth collateral in exchange. Well, is that not QE? So we've got the failures to deliver as a glaring symptom for the reverse repo abuses that are of the order of $1 trillion a month, which is exactly what I said a few months ago when I denied that the QE was just $45 billion a month. I was saying, no, it's at least twice that, probably $100 billion a month, maybe double that, but it could be $1 trillion a month or more if you factor in derivatives. So if you lump the standard oil hedges together with petrodollar derivative contracts, you see how you probably are now in a position where the U.S. is funding the black hole of derivative failures to the tune of $1 trillion a month. And if that's what's visible, I guarantee you it's triple that with things you don't see using the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So you ask me, are there going to be a lot of new events in the next few months? I say yes, and they will extend from the Treasury bond fractures. We're going to see the beginning of Treasury bond failure events, Paul. That's what I think is coming, and it's going to wreck the U.S. power structure.
So, Jim, do you think, can we see now any people bailing out? I mean, is anybody heading for the hills or Costa Rica or something?
I don't know what you mean by that question.
Well, I mean, if we're getting close to things blowing up, I would think more people would be, I don't know, leaving places like New York and wherever, going to Montana or going to Panama or something. I don't know. But what do you think? Do we see any evidence that maybe there are some people preparing in high places? What do you think?
Well, I think the elite have been moving their money out of dollar instruments into offshore accounts, maybe the Caribbean where they get a pass on Cayman and Bermuda. I think a big destination for elite money is Panama. They've got three sides there: the legitimate import-export, the South American drug trade, and the U.S. CIA drug trade. Those are the three elements of their banking system. Now, being an expat here, I don't like that name, but people understand what it means. I haven't renounced citizenship, and I won't. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm proud of my country. I'd like to see it restored to a respectful position with its leadership, and that's not an easy prospect after 9/11 and the what I believe to be the neocon, Nazi, fascist coup d'etat. That's what I think happened on 9/11, and I'd like to see the government restored and Constitution restored, and maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't. I don't know, but I will not say I don't know, I don't care, because I do care. But what I notice from my access to expat information is that there are somewhere around 15 to 20,000 Americans renouncing their citizenship per month. So is there an exodus? Yeah, you focused on the elite. I don't know about the elite so much. I don't know any elite. I don't know a single billionaire. I do know several millionaires in Costa Rica. So there is an exodus. There is a movement out. There are a lot of Americans coming to Latin America, but what I'm noticing here in Costa Rica is that there are far fewer coming to Costa Rica in the last year or two. They've made it more difficult. They've made some of the visa requirements more difficult. They're basically saying to Americans, if you want to come here, you must file for residence. And because we're not going to let you play the tourist game of a 90-day visa, they called it a sequential visa holder. And I did that for a few years, but I'm now a resident, and it's it's kind of nice. I feel a little bit more legitimate. I like the whole idea of contributing to the Social Security. They call it the caja, the box, the Social Security fund. So the leaders steal it, and the gringos replace it with resident fees. That's kind of interesting. I mean, in the United States, they raided the Social Security fund every year just to cover deficits, but here they just basically steal it. And they stole it also in Nicaragua. It's a national sport in a lot of Latin American countries. Just steal the caja. The caja is the short word for Social Security fund. So I'm paying into that. There are fewer gringos coming here, and now I'm noticing that there are a number of gringos that are leaving Costa Rica for Panama and Colombia. Medellin it's got a bad reputation for being a site for kidnapping and drug running. And Medellin, Colombia is called the City of Eternal Spring. They're very close to the equator. They're about 5,000 feet in elevation. And they do have a rainy season, but it's really nice all the time in weather. So if you don't show money there, don't wear expensive shoes and Rolex watches and expensive clothes, and live in a gorgeous house with a driver and a BMW or a Mercedes pulling out of a gate every once in a while. If you don't live like that, your risk of being kidnapped is 100 times less. And that's how it is for about 4 men that I know who live there. And they come to Costa Rica and, hey, Jim, how you doing? You ought to come down and visit us down there in Medellin. And I say, no, that's okay. I don't think so. I don't want the Colombian stamp on my passport. And they laugh and say, well, I understand. There is some kidnapping going on, but it's usually and they mention two or three areas. So where the rich live and the rich. Yeah, I'm getting off topic here. I know.
It's okay. Hey, Jim, I went to Colombia a couple of years ago, and I really liked it. I thought it had a great future. I liked Popayan, which is like a university town in the mountains. And Medellin's a little too dirty, although it is, I guess, like the best place for salsa in the world or something. I forget. There was some like salsa conference going on when I was there. But anyway, yeah, a lot of Europeans go to Colombia now because it's cheap compared to Panama or Costa Rica.
Colombian economy, including rent, is approximately 30% cheaper than Costa Rica. It's approximately 30% cheaper than Panama. And furthermore, it's about 50% cheaper than Panama's housing. Panama is not cheap with housing. It's got that import-export thing going for it where you can buy cell phones for half the cost of Costa Rica. Costa Rica has an import tax of 20%. I think for some tech items it's a little bit more. But, I'm content here. I've got friends here. I've got a couple gals who are near and dear to my heart. I don't really care to go to Colombia. I'm always afraid of some, I don't know, dangerous people and kidnapping in Colombia. I mean, I'm a little old-fashioned with my fearfulness. If I'm not scared, pardon me, had a lot of interviews and conversations lately. If I'm not scared or worried about my safety here in Costa Rica, why would I need to go check out Colombia as a new prospect? I've got a friend who goes to Cartagena once in a while, and he loves it there. And I've got another friend who I met here. He's from Texas, and he actually moved to Cartagena, and he set up his business there. He's got an international business. They actually have a product. It's not not an intellectual property kind of thing like mine. I sell passwords, and people download a report. That's the business here. But There's something called the Shemitah. You mentioned this regarding the next few months, and there's a lot of indication that something nasty is coming. As I like to say, something ugly this way comes. And the Shemitah, if you go back and look at every 7 years, I did this dating back to World War II. I mean, you can do the Shemitah. I'm taxing my memory here, but you had the 2008 Lehman. You had the 2001 9/11 incident. What was 7 years before that? 1994, I believe that incident was the Mexican currency crisis combined with perhaps, I like to attach significance to the Greenspan irrational exuberance, admitting that they have a financial bubble system in place. The irrational exuberation was, I think, coincident with the 94 Mexican crisis. 87 with Black Monday, that was pretty easy. 1980, you had the explosion in the gold price and the Hunt brothers incident. 1973, you had the Arab oil embargo. 7 before that is 67. I can't remember, but it was certainly the height of the Vietnam War.
Well, there's the Israeli war, right?
Okay, the 6-day war in Israel. Okay, I think there was one more big event then. 7 less from that would be 1960, 59. All right, that's good enough. But I once came up with a list, and 1945 was, I believe, on that same path or right around there. So the end of World War II. All right, so you can go back to the Arab embargo at the very least from 73. And now what's the 2015 event going to be? How about the broken petrodollar? Not U.S. Treasury bond default, but the broken Treasury system from the dismantled petrodollar. Anyone who takes a look at the finance situation today and misses or overlooks how the dollar has risen and the oil price has fallen far more than what the demand and supply would dictate in its dynamics for the oil price, you're missing something pretty big. So the 2015 event is the dollar oil situation, which I call the dismantling of the petrodollar machinery. You can blame it on shale all you want. You can blame it on economic decline all you want. You don't see a 60, 70% decline in the oil price from a recession. You don't do that. You see a 15 or 20% decline. So there's a lot more going on. Let me add something in back thought here, the Iran situation. As the situation is resolved in Iran, and they're welcomed somewhat into the Gulf community, and their oil export is welcomed again to the world community, in particular the Asians and Europeans for oil supply. Don't expect the oil price to come back up. So bringing Iran in with the Kerry, whose jaw was reconstructed, managing that process, or at least attending that process and pretending to manage that process. If the U.S. Secretary of State is blessing the movement of Iran coming back into the community of non-warring nations, if you will, then the U.S. is pretty much admitting that the oil price is not going to rebound. And this is very bad news for Wall Street banks, in particular, I believe, Morgan Stanley, which I'm not exactly sure, but I believe that as an extension of their Platts oil desk, that they underwrote perhaps most of the oil futures hedging. The hedge book for Morgan Stanley, I believe, is the biggest. I'm not sure. Just like Lehman Brothers was the biggest player in mortgage bonds. So it's going to be interesting. The Shemitah, I call it Shemitah. You can call it what, Chemtah or whatever. I don't know. Shemitah, it's a Hebrew word. I believe is at work now. And I don't know if it's a 7-year cycle that has to do with the credit cycle, a surplus, what do you call it? saturation of debt, and it has to be resolved, and with defaults and reconstructed debt and all that. I don't know. I don't really care. Whether it's a more evil motive of every 7 years, the elites and their Satanist buddies get together and say, let's cause a lot of misery. Isn't this a lot of fun? That could be a factor too. So I think the two are woven together because every 7 years there is a saturation of debt. And notice that in the last 6 years, 7 years since Lehman, we've treated all the debt problems by giving more debt. And that's not a solution. Not a solution.
Got a question. When was the last time we had a jubilee? I mean, I'm waiting for.
I had a jubilee yesterday afternoon at about 4 o'clock, but I won't tell you her name.
Julep, right? Oh, okay. That's a little different thing. Okay. Hey, as a last topic, why don't we go on to the idea of, I guess you would say, is there a clampdown on using money? And related to that would be kind of like physical gold storage, or what could be safe, or what do you think of Switzerland, Singapore, things like that. So what do you think? Is it getting? It seems to me that in my life it's getting harder and harder to use money. What do you think?
Well, I think you're seeing evidence of a growth in capital controls, and if they had done the capital controls all in one step from say 2005 and left everything the same at 2005, and then suddenly 2015 we have all the new rules in place, there would be a furious reaction of all these new capital controls are suddenly coming on. But instead what they do is they have a new capital control every several months. And the latest capital control is a little more devious, and it is FATCA. FATCA, Foreign Accounts Compliance and Transaction Administration, something like that. FACTA, F-A-C-T-A. That is the ultimate in capital controls, because what they're doing is they're having a sign-up registration of all foreign accounts, all foreign dollar accounts. I got a friend who told me just a couple of weeks ago, Jim, I have an account in Belize, and I couldn't believe it. But I got my businesses, and they're very legitimate. And I have one business that does significant commerce with offices in Central America, with Honduras, Belize, Guatemala, and a little bit in Mexico. No more description necessary than that. But he said, I couldn't believe it. I was told by the Belize bankers that since I'm an American citizen, I have to reveal all the details on my banking account in Belize. I said, well, that sounds nutty. How can Belize get away with that? And he said, just by virtue of the fact that it's not so much that I'm a U.S. citizen. I said, is it just that it's a dollar-based account? It's full disclosure of all dollar-based accounts, whether they're covered by a corporation. There's no privacy in companies anymore. And he said, that's what it appears to be. FATCA is kind of smashing all that down. And wow, that is very interesting. So that's part of the capital controls, Paul. I mean, we hear about cashless society, and some nations are actually making progress toward the elimination of cash.
Scandinavia is already like that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a very bad trend, and I have a joke, and it's not necessarily 100% accurate, but it's a funny joke. If the United States does that, then all the pushcart hot dog vendors in Manhattan will go out of business. But that's not really true, and I got some sassy responses from a couple of, I don't know whether they were clients or followers. I got a bunch of paid clients, but I've got an even more just jackass type follower. I call them jackass wannabes, hat trick letter followers. But some guy wrote to me and said, Jim, don't you know some of the hot dog vendors actually have a credit card swiping device on their push carts? And they're not really push carts. They're more like stands Okay, they're small kiosks, if you will, and I don't know whether they have wheels. It's not important whether they do, but they do have a merchant account with, say, MasterCard or Visa. Okay, well, maybe the cashless society is easier than I think, but in the urban centers, if you're talking about, backwoods of Terre Haute, Indiana, or say the outskirts of Montgomery, Alabama, or say Boise, Idaho, I think they're going to have a really difficult time installing that cashless system. It's going to put out of business, I think, 40% of the American small businesses. But that's it could be. I don't really care. I regard the cashless society movement as a clear signal of the U.S. turning desperate. The leaders turning absolutely desperate. They don't want a gold-backed trade system. They'd rather an even harsher, controllable system with no cash at all. So they control the currency, they control QE for making more toxic the currency, they control all movement of cash, and they can say to somebody, you're a bad guy, we don't like what you're doing, you're not going to be able to participate in the economy because we say so. And where's the checks and balances and the due process legally for that? Nowhere.
And Jim, then where does gold fit in? Where does physical gold? Where is it safe? How can you move it around? What can you do?
Well, I think they're going to have a terrible time legislating against gold. They're already now seeing a breakdown in the suppression game for the official gold market. I got a message just this morning from an Argentine client. I don't know whether he's in, Rio, Buenos Aires, but most people who corresponded with me in Argentina are from Buenos Aires. And he wrote to me and he said, Jim, I just bought some gold coins. And the only gold coins available in Argentina are from Mexico. And they're selling at an 80% premium over the standard price. So when people ask me, what do you think is going to happen with the gold and silver price? I say, define it first. I'm not going to make a comment about a concept that's rather stupid, namely, what is the gold price? The gold price is what people have to pay in order to get it, is it not? It's not what people are forced to sell it at from a controlled price. If you can't buy it at the official price, then that's not the price because it in no way, shape, or form reflects an equilibrium on supply versus demand. So you're seeing a skyrocketing. And I got another message 2 weeks ago from one of my team members, a colleague. And he wrote and said, Jim, amazing things are happening with the pricing of recent year mint coins. You're seeing now 2006, 7, 8, and 9 for mint gold coins from the U.S. and Canada. Just, we're talking about 7, 8, 9 years old mint coins. They're trading like collector's items. So the shortage and price reflection is now akin to 80 and 120-year-old gold and silver coins when they're less than 10 years old. So the shortage is acute, and the response within the system is very clear on premium. And the voice continues to tell me, if you want to buy a couple $100 million worth of gold, you got to pay an extra 30% at least in premium. So what's the gold price? Well, if you want to buy $100 million worth, apparently the gold price is $1,500 to $1,700. So what's the gold price? It really depends on your perspective and your definition, and I don't, just like a stupid moron, say, well, the gold price is what they tell us at the COMEX. No, that's from a crime center and a ticker that's running out front like you see in a Vegas casino.
Well, we're run by crime syndicates. I mean,
no doubt.
And you talked about Langley a while ago, but in a sense, that's their biggest operation, is that they're a syndicate.
Yeah, and people ask me sometimes, when did this all start, Jim? When do you think it all started? Did it start with Black Monday? Did it start with Clinton and Papa Bush? And when did this all start? I think it was long before 9/11 and 2001 incidents, and I say I think it started with the killing of Kennedy, and I think the Langley fingerprints are all over that. Papa Bush is all over that. Do people realize that Papa Bush was arrested in the book repository on the Kennedy assassination day, along with a couple of other men arrested at the crime scene, being in the building when Kennedy was shot at the book repository building? And they all were let go by Langley, who described them as independent oil contractors. So, the watch name for the killing contract for Kennedy was the independent oil contractors led by Papa Bush. Does anybody realize that Jack Ruby was a tenant whose landlord was Papa Bush? This is all very easy to piece together, but the killing of Kennedy was the beginning, I think, Paul, because look what happened after Kennedy left. Nixon was made the president. I mean, he came back from the dead. Nobody liked Nixon. He was the most unpopular presidential candidate in an era, in decades, a generation.
Hey, Jim, I think you're forgetting.
I'm not done here. I'm not done here. This is really important. After they killed Kennedy, they installed Nixon. They got rid of the gold standard, which put power in Langley and Wall Street's hand, and they brought to the fore Henry Kissinger, who suggested, as a Rockefeller agent, that the Arabs quadruple their oil price. The Arabs did not suggest it. Kissinger did, and said, this will work out for you, but you got to promise to do all of your oil surplus revenue in treasury bonds, and you're going to have a lot more money to buy U.S. military weapons. So this is where it all began, killing Kennedy.
Oh, for sure. As for your question, though, of how an unpopular guy became president, don't forget that Bobby Kennedy and Wallace had that phenomenon of, 9 bullets coming out of a pistol that holds 6 or whatever. So there was some additional help, is what I'm saying.
Well, wait a minute. Are you saying it's not possible that one chamber can fire 2 bullets?
Something like that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that might be. It could be. They got plausible deniability there. But since when did the American public care that 9 bullets went? And besides, didn't Kennedy get shot by a bullet that made a mid-course correction and kind of a 30-degree angle bang just like that? I mean, things like that are possible because that's what the Warren Commission concluded.
Smart bullet.
I was 11. Yeah, I was 11 years old, Paul, when Kennedy was killed, and I said to my father a month later, 11 years old, why is the U.S. government in such a hurry to have the Warren Commission make its conclusions? And he said, I think we really need to get this disaster behind us, Jim. And I said, sounds to me like they're trying to falsify it. And he said, oh, Jim, I don't know about that. My father has not questioned one major incident for conspiracy in his entire life. And he's a very smart guy. My father is one of my best examples that I know of where I make a conclusion, and this is a very important statement, that cluelessness regarding money, being totally lost as to understanding the conspiracies in progress, just having the lights out in one's mind has no correlation whatsoever with education or intelligence. None at all.
Jim, I disagree. I think it's a reverse correlation. Because I'm used to working with MIT types or, the high-end scientific types. And I would say that typically people who are more intelligent, at least in terms of tests, are more believing of textbooks and authority figures. And Actually, people who are, let's say, I don't know, car mechanics or something, carpenters, are more skeptical of the authorities than people who get paid very well to, work within the system.
Well, that's your perception, and I respect it. My perception is the exact opposite. In my life, in my last many years, I've come in contact with a lot of people who work in my front yard, cut down the tree, come by and fix an electrical box. People at work who are secretaries, people at work who are far less educated. And I find that the less educated, many of them believe the 9/11 story, and they say things like, well, I don't really know. I mean, who am I? I don't know. That's what they're telling me, but I don't know. That's what I hear from the uneducated or lesser educated. From the intelligent, I don't have contact much with the MIT and government research weapon laboratory types. I have contact with people who are, say, electronics engineer professors from Texas, other PhDs in the scientific field, people in high professional levels with good, solid Ivy League degrees, and the majority of them tell me, oh, obviously, Jim, all the evidence points to the official 9/11 story being bullshit. That's the great majority of them. So we have opposite experiences, and that's okay. But what I have found, my conclusion, and I'm permitted to make my own conclusions just like you are, is that the acceptance of the official story or the embracing of the conspiracy theories has nothing to do with intelligence. I have 3 educated remaining people in my family, my older brother, younger sister, and my father. None of them believe. My brother believes the 9/11 conspiracy, but he said, Jim, I just don't want to waste my time running with it. You could spend your whole life like you're doing. I think you're wasting a lot of your mental energy. I said, no, I'm doing constructive things with the hat trick letter, following the gold world and studying and tracking and laying out the sequence for the return to the gold standard. And that is not a waste of time, you idiot brother. My brother's got a Phi Beta Kappa degree in economics, a bachelor's degree. And as far as economics goes, he's one of the stupidest guys I know. So we don't have the same experience. That's okay. I think it's a genetic thing. I think there's a critical thinking type gene, distrust of authority gene. Maybe it's mistreatment like what I had when I was young. I got treated a little bit rough by my father, and we're good buddies now. We're fine. We resolve things only through my effort. It was a follow-on effort of giving up drugs in 1987. It was 99% marijuana. I dabbled around with barbiturates a little bit, but I was a marijuana freak. I was a stonehead in college and graduate school and later. But so it's kind of interesting to watch this phenomenon, and I do think that there's a nature-nurture issue here. I think there's a suspicion gene in us, but there's also a distrust of authority, learned experience. I was mistreated in Catholic high school. I get tired of the teachers sticking their hand down my pants. Call me old-fashioned. I get tired of it. I actually broke one teacher's hand when it was inside my pants. I broke his hand. He was my freshman year math teacher. I broke his hand and made a deal with him afterwards. I won't tell anybody how you broke your hand and why you have a handkerchief instead of a cast on your hand, the one that's not writing on the blackboard. I won't tell anybody. If you keep your damn hand out of my pants and quit pushing me into the cloakroom where you can, have your way with me. I don't like it. I'm going to fucking knee you in the nuts next time. And he left me alone, and my father did not believe my story. So I was a 14-year-old kid on my own. And that's how suspicion against authority increases, Paul, in my book. But I think there's a basic distrust, suspicion gene, and we're never going to find out. Maybe we will later with more advanced robots than what we have as the guy sitting in the White House.
Okay, that's quite a robot. Hey, I tell you what, Jim, we're about to wrap it up. Is there any last topic or anything you want to mention or cover before we call it a day?
Not really, except my hope. I don't want to get into any more, difficult stories and topics, but my hope is that we can restore the U.S. and its leadership and get the satanic bankers and the real evil bankers who are in bed with the warmongering military. We don't need to have a war footing. It's amazing that so many Americans actually believe that we're under attack. No, we're under a counterattack because nations of the world don't like what we're doing with the dollar, interfering with their democratic process, usage of NGO organizations to undermine their societies. They don't like it. They don't like the United States having an economy on a credit card. They don't like the lack of industry in the United States. They don't like the U.S. making the rules for the rest of the world. And they're fighting back. So I hope that in a peaceful way we can have a transition to the gold standard and the Constitution. Gold standard for money across the world, but the Constitution restored for the United States. I'm constantly told, this is a theme of Ben Fulford, who I put half in the goofy camp and half in the brilliant camp, well-informed camp, but I don't really know any more about him. But he thinks that the U.S. military could be our saving force. Oh, when are we going to see any evidence that the military is doing something useful? I don't think being in Iraq, being in Afghanistan, being in Syria, being in Ukraine, I don't think any of them are useful. And now we've got the U.S. government taking over National Guards at the state level. They're taking over the state police at the state level. They're taking over the FBI and putting it under Homeland Security. So what is the law enforcement for the United States? Were there not something like 20,000 incidents in the United States where people were pulled to the side by cops, police, and had cash stolen from them? Were there not 1,600 incidents of suspects under custody killed? So we're in a police state right now, and I'd like to see the Constitution restored, the Republic restored, and the dollar shoved off the stage in favor of a gold-backed currency. I think we're going to see the new Scheist dollar, which I never mentioned in this interview, when the Treasury bill is refused in trade payment, and we have to come up with something for U.S.-only domestic usage. And I think that the new Scheist dollar is going to have a phony gold backing, just like the U.S. government accounting for gold. They claim to have deep storage gold backing up the U.S. currency situation, financial foundation, and banking system and all. No, the deep storage gold is nothing more than a bunch of barrack properties in Nevada. It's an exaggeration, but you get the idea. A bunch of properties with unmined gold. So that's not a basis for a currency. Panama's got an interesting basis for a currency, and that's 250 tons of gold, which is the equivalent, multiply by 80, and you get, what is that, 17,000 tons of gold? 80 is their per capita ratio. I'm sorry, their population ratio. So 17,000 tons of gold for Panama could back a currency. And they've also got 85 million pounds of copper. That's all obtained through royalty payments for copper mining done on Panama soil with mining projects. I'd like to see the dollar go away, replaced by a legitimate gold-backed currency that's used across the world, maybe several of them are used across the world, and the United States return to a Constitution standard. And it's going to take a lot. I think we're going to see a lot of mayhem and a lot of dead people because our leaders refuse to liquidate the big banks and refuse to go to a legitimate currency system like a gold-silver-backed currency. we're not going to do this seamlessly with a nice, peaceful transition because we are using war to defend our dollar. We are using terror to defend our dollar. And it's becoming quite clear the dollar is a terror currency, and I've been calling it a toxic currency ever since QE.
Well, you got that right. Well, why don't you mention your newsletter again and your website, and then we can call it a day.
Okay, the website is www.goldenjackass.com. No hyphens in there, nothing special. It's the name of the website. My mother used to call me her little jackass, so I amused her by having the website called goldenjackass.com. In the website, you'll find a lot of free material. The main web page is the free public domain site, and it includes a lot of public interviews like this, and I try to make sure that all the interviews that I do have a link. And if they don't provide me a link, I just don't do another show with them, because I have a lot of subscribers and followers who like to know what's going on and need the boost emotionally like a cheerleader. So go to the main page, the public page, check out the interviews, check out some of the public articles, like a recent one about the $1 trillion per month in hidden QE. That was an article just a few days ago. And I hope you sign up for the Hat Trick Letter, because that is the business end of the website. It's called the Hat Trick Letter. It has typically, but not always, 2 reports per month, every month. And it's the Money War Report for high-level issues and the Golden Currency Report for lower-level issues, and not lesser important, but just ground level. So it's the Hat Trick Letter found on the goldenjackass.com website. And I welcome people to visit and sign up. We've been in business now for 11 and a half years, and I'm the editor and kind of like the chief bottle, the cook, the main secretary, the cook, and the chief bottle washer. I do have a lot of help. I'm very grateful to the 7 or 8 colleagues I have, including the voice. We chew things over, and we do not get fooled much. And we're ahead of most things. The Voice has been a very helpful guide for future events. He'll say things like, Jim, you need to integrate your forecast and just be aware of something that's coming in the next, 18 months, 2 years, maybe a little more, but it's coming. So he told me in advance, 6 months in advance of the Southern European failure of their sovereign bonds, their government debt for the pigs nations. So that he's just very, very helpful for me to get my forecast correct. And I give him a lot of credit for the correct forecast, but I give a lot of credit to other guys for seeing things that I don't see. And then I just flesh them out and put a lot of information on it and devise it into a forecast and see how it's linked to other things and phenomena. So that's the story. That's the website. And I welcome people to visit and sign up for the newsletter.
Okay, Jim. Well, thanks much for your time and coming. We appreciate it, and we appreciate all your work on the newsletters and the website. So,
well, it's a pleasure being on, and I think it's been several months. I hope you invite me back in several months again.
Oh, definitely. Anyway, Jim, thanks. That's it, folks. It's a wrap. Till next time.